All right, we are back talking to Peter Montgomery of the Right Wing Watch. You've got a lot less facial hair this time, Peter. You were getting a bit shaggy there last time we talked. I
Yeah, I
haven't
decided I
shaved mine
should
yet.
decided to lose a few pounds.
Yeah, the easy way, just shave it off, shave a few whiskers off. Well, so it's been a month just about since we talked the last time. What's going on in the evangelical Trump world now that Joe Biden has been certified, sworn in as president? Trump has been banished to Magistan, as Michael Cohen calls it, Mar-a-Lago. He was acquitted, of course. That was the big news, and which was not
Yes.
really a surprise, was it? Were you prepared for that to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, none of us really expected that, most of the Republicans were going to
Yeah.
be willing to vote against him. And I was frankly surprised that 7 Republican senators did vote
Hmm.
to find him guilty. So that was somewhat encouraging. The discouraging part of that, of course, is that it means that most Republicans in the Senate voted to not hold him accountable for
Yeah.
inciting an insurrection that, injured hundreds of people and left several people dead. And
Yeah.
so that's troubling. And it means that, Trump can claim it as a victory and can go nestle in there at Mar-a-Lago and plot his next moves and
Hmm.
uh, figure out which Republicans he's going to try to take down as vengeance for having betrayed him, which seems to be like what he's planning to do. And
Yeah.
it does seem like that's the next step for some of his supporters, is to
Hmm.
really devote their energies into purging the party of people who were not, 100% loyal.
Hmm. It's true, isn't it? Some of the people who voted to convict him were almost immediately censured, weren't they? I can't remember who exactly, but by the Republican Party
Yes, several
for
of them
voting
had
against him.
their state level Republican parties in several states quickly voted to censure. And I know North Carolina was one. I think
Yeah.
Washington State was another. So yeah, there's a few of those.
Hmm. Yeah.
And you have one of the guys, Dustin Stockton, was a former Tea Party activist who's now kind of one of the March for Trump religious right organizers. He now has launched a project called uh, Tyrants, something to do with tyrants. I'm blanking on the name, but he's going after all the Republicans who voted to
To
impeach Trump or voted to let the
right to
impeachment go forward.
convict. Hmm.
He's traveling to the districts trying to recruit people to run against the incumbents.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just what has the Republican Party become? I mean, we already knew it was the cult of Trump, wasn't it? It was the party of Trump while he was president, and it appears that he's still. It's very much his party. I think didn't Donald Trump Jr. make some statement to that effect after he was acquitted, saying, "Look, this is still the party of Trump, whether you like it or not," to the
And
Republicans.
there's some recent polling that really that holds that to be true.
Hmm.
When they put together a list of potential people running in 2024 with Trump in it, he runs away with the field.
Hmm.
And when they asked Republicans, if they wanted Trump to still be playing a big role at the party, to have him be at the center of the party, most of them say yes. So he really has molded the party to his image, and
Hmm.
I think that's one downside to him being acquitted, is that it's going to make it easier for him to continue to uh,
Hmm.
play whatever role he decides he wants to play.
Hmm. As you say, it wasn't surprising, I guess, that we knew the Republican senators were going to acquit him in the impeachment trial. But as so many pundits have said, I mean, these guys, these men and women, they were victims of the crime.
Yeah.
They were standing in the crime scene as victims and jurors. Basically, it's never before happened where a jury was also the victim and yet turned around and voted to acquit the man who incited the insurrection and the riots. It's
Yes,
insane.
and the fact that they not only did they vote to acquit him, but several of them were, basically part of the defense team. After the
Mhm.
the opening days of the trial, it seemed like Trump's lawyers were just the worst in the world and were doing a
Yeah.
terrible job. And so Senator Cruz and Mike Lee and some others huddled to sort of help them out with their strategy. So what kind of trial is that? It's
Exactly.
they call it a trial, but of course it's doesn't it's not carried out with any of the kind of normal rules and
Yeah.
regulations of a legal trial. So it really is a political trial, and that's how they treated it. And in spite of the fact that I thought that the House managers did an excellent job. And so, some people said, well, if we knew the Republicans were not going to convict, why did we waste the time? But I thought that it was really important for the House managers, the House of Representatives, guys, and the men and women who made the case did a really excellent job. And so they created a historical record that I think was really important to do.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's as you say, it's on record. I mean, Jamie Raskin and the others did an amazing job. So here's the situation. Well, and of course, everyone knows now that it's so ironic too. Mitch McConnell. I mean, what the hell? That guy pushes to delay the trial. He could have carried it out from the Senate's side while Trump was still in office, delays it till he's out of office, and then turns around and says, well, he's not in office anymore. It's not constitutional. And then says he was totally responsible for the riot. Yet I'm going to, in the same breath, vote to acquit him. I mean, Mitch McConnell, that guy is just a political creature, isn't he?
He really is. I mean, it's so important that the Democrats won the 2 Senate runoffs, the day before the insurrection.
Yeah, it's huge.
Because otherwise McConnell would still be having the, kind of one-man dictatorship of the Senate that he's had. Mm-hmm. And so it's so important that he doesn't have that power. And he still has plenty of power to wield, but it's a really good thing for the country that he's no longer the majority leader.
And like you said, the trial results were so strange because looking at the sheer numbers, the actual votes were to convict Trump. It was just that they needed a 2/3 majority, didn't they? So there was a majority who voted to convict him.
Yeah, 57-43 is not even that close. So it was a real repudiation. But because of the rules and the requirements, he and his allies can run around saying acquitted, acquitted. This was a sham, and that's what they're doing.
Yeah. So now the question becomes: there's a couple things, isn't there, where on the one hand, Trump's got all this legal exposure now that he's no longer president. I mean, how many lawsuits is he staring at the barrel down the barrel of? He's got the investigation in Georgia of his phone calls and pressures to the ironically Republicans in Georgia that he was trying to get them to overturn the election results. He's got sexual harassment suits that now appear to be moving forward. He's got, of course, Southern District in New York. They're looking at his real estate dealings, among other things. I mean, what other legal exposure does Trump have out there?
I mean, I think those are the main ones. I think there's a number of other possible lawsuits around his finances, around other sexual harassment claims. So I think I think that's one of the reasons, frankly, that he was so intent on keeping power, not only because he liked the power that came with being president and the power to enrich his family that came with being president, but it kept him out of the court. And I think he knows he's going to be spending a lot of money on lawyers and a lot of time in court in the coming years.
And yet he's got this incredible base he's raised, well, at last count, $200 million into this so-called political action committee, which is a slush fund, as it seems like it is. There's no accountability. So where is that money going? Is that to pay his legal bills? Is it an enrichment scam, a grift, a con? I mean, the man is a master huckster, isn't he? He's always been his whole career.
That's right. It could be all the above. He could use it to pay his family members to be, spokespeople for him on whatever new project he has. He can use it to, try to create new candidates to sort of build up some Trumpish candidates who might decide to challenge the Republicans who he feels betrayed him, and he could use that money to try to support them and take down some of his political enemies. And he can probably use some of it to just pay for whatever traveling around and soaking up adulation at rallies that he wants to do.
He loves his rallies. He always did, didn't he? He never stopped holding them from almost the minute he was sworn in. He held rallies his entire presidency. Obviously, no other president in history has ever, campaigned essentially from the very beginning of his 4 years in office. He never stopped, did he? He loved the adulation of his base.
Yeah, and they organized on President's Day. They had a few hundred Trump activists out there in Florida,
Hmm.
gathered to, wave their flags and have him drive through, and they could get excited and he could get excited. And this is something that his supporters organized. They worked to get people out to this thing, but then they tried to portray it as, the spontaneous, this is how Trump is loved so much. This is evidence that Biden couldn't really have won because people love Trump so much,
Yeah.
So it is clear that Trump himself and his team are not going to ever give up on this false claim that he won the election, that he won it by a landslide, that it was stolen from him. And it's really shameful that they're not going to give up on that, because that is precisely what fueled the rage behind the insurrection at the Capitol. Which is what Mitch McConnell admitted after he had voted to not hold Trump accountable.
It's his fault.
Yeah,
but I'm not going to convict him.
Yeah, so it's very clear that people are still going to be pushing that. Some of his political supporters, some of his religious rights supporters, they're going to keep pushing the stolen election claims. And, I think they hope that will help keep their base, riled up to be engaged in 2022 and 2024, because, they have a lot of disillusioned people out there because they promised so much. They promised that God was going to keep Trump in office, and they prophesied that God was going to keep Trump in office. And so there's some people out there who are not happy about that. And they don't want him to be discouraged. They want him to keep him riled up.
Exactly. So that's what I was hoping to talk about. We talked last time about the Capitol riots. I mean, I can't remember. We talked sometime in early mid-January, not long after the riots, and obviously touched on this issue of the Christian nationalism that was on full display, which is a big part of the whole Trump base. I mean, as Andrew Whitehead and Sam Perry, they've demonstrated, haven't they, statistically, that the number one motivating driver for Trump voters was, did they believe in Christian nationalism?
That's right.
Yeah. So both in 2016 and 2020. So we know that the whole thing is intrinsically tied together, isn't it? The whole thing is built on a Christian nationalist platform, American exceptionalism, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, and it was and very much, inseparable from Trump himself and from their belief that he personally had been prophesied to lead the country, to return the country to God, to preserve the religious liberty of Christians that they think that liberals and Democrats want to destroy. So all of that Christian nationalism tied up with this real sort of cult of personality around Trump as this divinely anointed king, has all fallen apart.
But has it? This is the question. So I was thinking we could zero in on one or two in particular. Last time we talked about Greg Locke. I'm not sure what he's doing now. Still ranting, I guess, in his church somewhere, isn't he?
Greg Locke is one of the people who, one of the splits that has now occurred is that there are some of the prophetic crowd who have admitted that they were wrong and have apologized. And some who are saying, well, we weren't really wrong because Trump really did win and it was stolen from him, but Biden's the president. And then there's a few, like Greg Locke, who are still saying Trump is going to be back, and not in 2024, but that God or the military or some combination of the two of those is going to bring Trump back next month and reinstall him as president in March. So there are some folks who are, that's now where they have moved the goalposts, right? They keep moving the goalposts. Now we're talking about, now we're looking at March. So
right, this is the thing, and then they were saying that even early on there was going to be a miraculous overturning of the results. Then that didn't happen straight away, as you say. So then, as they keep moving the goalposts back, so now, I've heard Greg Locke say a few times, "I will never accept Joe Biden as my president," and that sort of thing. So he just is doubling and tripling down. I was looking too at Hank Kunneman. What do you know about Hank Kunneman? Because he's another one that seems to be now coming to the fore. He predicted a long time ago that Trump was going to win. He was one of those many. I think I read an article today that said something around 40 New Apostolic Reformation prophetic types predicted that he would win. And going back couple of years even.
Oh yeah.
So it's a huge number of people that made a very specific prophecy. And that's the thing. This article said that, if you can make a vague prophecy, it may or may not come true. You can always weasel out. But when you say Trump is going to win, God told me in November 2020, and it doesn't happen, what do you do then?
Well, it's interesting because, Hank Kunneman, he's Omaha, Nebraska based guy, and who's an author and prophet, by his reckoning. And he's someone who's on Kenneth Copeland's Victory Channel shows, and so he's got he has access to an audience, and he's one of the guys who's been most furious about being called out. Basically, he's angry that people are accusing him of being a false prophet for getting it wrong, and so he keeps doubling down in his own ways on why he wasn't, and that the people that God really hates are the people that call prophets false prophets. I mean,
I know the right-wing watch has flagged him up. I'm interested to look at some of these clips.
Right.
Let me share this screen, and I'll see if we can look at some of the failed Trump prophecies here. Need to make sure I click the sound. Okay. All right, so can you see my screen? I'm on the Zoom call here.
There we go.
Okay, so I was thinking this morning, who is Hank Kunneman? Okay, so as you say, here's the website of he's the pastor of the Lord of Hosts Church in Omaha, Nebraska. And you read through this and it's, there's like a doctrinal statement. It's pretty much boilerplate type, we believe this, that, and the other thing. There he is along with his wife. It's interesting too, that there's a lot of nepotism too, because I don't know who all these people are, but clearly there's this Christy Hare, Shane Hare, April Hare. I mean, they're all related. It's classic nepotism, isn't it?
That's a topic for a whole show sometime. I mean, I think one of the reasons that all these folks connected so much with Trump is because they all run their ministries like family businesses. Just like Trump employs all his kids.
Yeah.
A lot of the religious right folks employ 2 and 3 generations of the founders' families. So yeah.
So I found what's interesting, there's not a lot of information here on the church website. I mean, you can donate to apparently they want to build a bigger building, so you can donate funds to that. There's a building campaign and so forth. Now, I did a search on the word dominion, and what came up was a link to their website, hankandbrenda.org. That's linked here on it's this One Voice network. So I tried to find out if they were involved with like the Seven Mountains Dominion Mandate type stuff. And here's a daily decree from his wife, Brenda Kunneman. Apparently she does these prophetic decrees every day, I guess. So May 10th, 2020. It's not necessarily dominion theology like you might see in Seven Mountain stuff, but they seem to be all about this sort of spiritual breakthrough type ministry. And she says, we decree that you rise up and take your rightful place of authority and dominion against the evils and darkness of this world. We say that you shall not be intimidated by an antichrist spirit. You're going to tread boldly upon the powers of the devil, blah, blah, blah. She doesn't really talk much about, she says, may you walk in all the levels of dominion that Christ has established for you. May you take your rightful place of divine rule in Jesus' name. That's the only hit that I got on dominion on their website. Do you know anything about their kind of dominionist point of view, their theology?
I don't know exactly, but I would say that, I think a lot of the people that I would describe as dominionist, don't really put that label on themselves and don't necessarily use that term. Now, some do. The folks that are specifically talking Seven Mountains, that's very clear. But I think that, this kind of language that she's using about, dominion over the devil and in your own struggles, I think a lot of ministries, you see that as sort of the parallel to the political work. Like someone like Cindy Jacobs, she's always telling people and prophesying, the suddenlies, God is this is the season of breakthrough. This is the season of overcoming. And so
a lot
of
it season, isn't it?
Yes, it's a season or a time of, breakthrough,
renewal,
and suddenlies. And so there is that personal, dominion. There's that sort of personal taking dominion over your life and resisting the spirit of Jezebel. and other things in your own life. And so I think that when they use that kind of rhetoric, that kind of language in speaking about spiritual warfare on a personal level, it makes it very easy to transfer those same ideas when they're talking about spiritual warfare on a societal level and a political level.
Yeah. Well, I looked at some of his books here on Google Books just to kind of do a search on, and I found some interesting things here. There was a book he wrote in 2012 called Don't Leave God Alone. And again, a lot of his theology seems to be about like breakthrough anointment, spiritual warfare, which would certainly put him in that camp, wouldn't it? The New Apostolic Reformation, their sort of dominion theology perspective is it's all about unseating the demons that sit on top of these cultural mountains and all this. And he talks about different levels that you have dominion over. And he says here, not only do you have authority on 4 levels, but God has given you authority in 4 different realms. And he quotes Genesis 1:26, which is the kind of starter verse for dominion theology. And he talks about, you have dominion over the earth and so forth. You must, with your 4 levels of authority, you must govern as a king and a priest under God over the nation. So he's in that camp, isn't he? Even if he's not an avowed card-carrying dominionist in terms of 7 mountains.
And right there, then he's talking about too, your sphere of influence is given by God. So, that's very much if you're a businessman, that's your sphere of influence. And so that's where you're supposed to assert your dominion. If you're an educator, that's where you're supposed to assert your dominion. So that's, using your authority within the sphere of influence you have is very much at the core of that.
That's the theology. Yeah, and you can see this, he says, standing in your realms of authority means you have the right to stand in bold faith and action in your nation. So it's all about spiritual breakthrough, spiritual warfare. It puts him in that, and he's written chapters in other books by guy, he's appeared alongside Lance Wallnau and other well-known dominion. So to me, without doing a real deep dive into his theology, he's certainly in that camp, isn't he? He's part of that prophetic movement. Now you guys flagged him up January 25th. This was what you were referring to. I'm going to play this clip where he says God hates those who call prophets false. It's really interesting.
God hates 6 things. Are you ready? 7 are an abomination. Number 1, a proud look. Number 2, a lying tongue. Number 3, come on, abortion or hands that shed innocent blood. Yet you thought it was okay to vote for him. And a heart that devises wicked imaginations, and yet you voted for them. It's obvious they're wicked imaginations on how they want to destroy this country. Feet that are swift in running to mischief. It's amazing how quickly they signed their executive orders. That's called feet that run quickly to mischief.
No irony there.
And then all the lies that happen and false witness that we've had to put up with since 2016 on the news.
Now, I just want to interrupt for a second here. I mean, so he's not calling out Trump's lies. He's actually saying it's the media, the lying media. That's the problem, Peter. Didn't you know that?
Yeah, it's always remarkable to me when these guys who are talking about truth and lies, who are, all wound up in promoting Trump, and who either, either don't believe that Trump is just a pathological liar, that he, obviously is, or that just somehow they can't believe it, so they don't. They just, it's that cognitive dissonance.
Yeah,
that he is God's messenger, so he is truth personified. But it tells you that there there is a sort of a separate reality that they are living in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say, I watched a clip the other day. It was about 25 minutes long, too long to watch for our chat here, but it was with Josh Hawley, who, of course, is a diehard Trumpist, voted to try to overturn the election and all the rest of it. He appeared not too long ago on the Focus on the Family radio or TV broadcast YouTube channel, and they were all talking. The whole talk was about how the liberal media has this cancel culture, and they're trying to cancel him for standing up for what's right and all the rest of it. And not once in the whole 25-minute conversation did they mention the riots, Hawley's role in it. All he said was, I was trying to, promote the views of my constituents. That's all I was trying to do. So
right.
no self-reflection, no nothing. Just it's all the liberal media, the liberal woke media. That's what he said.
Yeah, I think, with very few exceptions, we're not going to see a lot of self-reflection out of the religious right.
No.
I wrote a piece for the American Prospect last few weeks about, just kind of going over some of the religious right rhetoric going back to last summer that was, kind of presaging the violent response to Trump's loss and the, kind of giving reason for people at the insurrection to believe they were behaving righteously. Mm-hmm. And, one of the things I said is, some of the religious right folks have, disavowed the violence and said, we're not for political violence, we disavow that. But I haven't seen very many of them take the next step and say, maybe our rhetoric did something to lead people to that.
Helped it flame it. All right, let's see what else Hank Kunneman has to say here. There's about a minute left.
But notice something. God hates what? He didn't say he hates discord. He hates he hates you that are being a troll. He hates you that are attacking your Christian brothers and sisters. Yeah, but they're false. They're wrong. Excuse me. How do you know? Because it hasn't come to pass. How do you know that it hasn't come to pass? First of all, the president was reelected. Let's get that clear. Second of all, he was given a second term based on reelection. Well, he's not serving it now because it was stolen by thieves.
Okay, there you have it. So it was stolen by thieves. He did win. That's the thing, isn't it? He did win, and it was all a giant ripoff. That's just, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I have to believe that the kind of defensiveness and anger that Kunneman has just about every time he speaks now is a sign that, I'm guessing that he has heard from a lot of his followers, or hears from, people at his church who, wonder what they should believe from him now. Someone who spent all that time prophesying that he knew that God had told him that Trump was going to be back in power. Yeah. And that obviously has proven false, as much as he wants to deny it. So I think that's why there's so much bluster, is probably because he's sick of people pointing out to him that he was a false prophet.
He can't. Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? That he's got that dynamic going whereby he's saying God hates you, who are calling his prophets liars. So he's putting God on his side, and yet he's got that goalpost moving again, isn't he?
Right.
It doesn't come to pass. Well, it hasn't yet, but it will.
It's a sort of just another verse and another. To me, it's very analogous to the kind of thing we always see with these guys who pull out Bible verse about touch not God's anointed.
Yeah,
that all these guys who do all kinds of spiritual abuse and financial abuse use that as a get out of jail free card, and that you can't question your minister, you can't question the head of the ministry because God put him there, and who are you to question God? And so that that is the kind of authoritarianism that I think is rife in the white evangelical world, and
it is
right.
And then there's this issue of conspiracy theories. So here's Murrillo. He's another one who appears regularly on like Flashpoint and Believer's Voice of Victory, alongside people like Jonathan Cahn and King Kunneman and Lance Wallnau. I'll just play a couple minutes of it. This is really interesting. So you can see there. Here's the date, February 3rd. He answers the question: did the prophets fail? As and people have obviously written and said, what do you think? So let's listen to this interesting response. Oh, he talks about how he believes Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell. They're actually very legit, very upstanding people.
And I'm going to tell you that I do believe that the voting machines do not pass the smell test. There are many reasons for me to doubt that this was a valid election. The first is a strange piece of evidence. Why is the leftist media so bent in not investigating it? Surely, if Joe Biden believes he is the valid president of the United States, if he believes that, he would be the most transparent and willing. Otherwise, he knows that 73 million people are going to be enraged and disenfranchised that are convinced this was a fraud election. It is in his best interest to determine who really won.
Anyway, and it goes on like that for 5 minutes or so, or 9 minutes. Again, so there's that conspiracy theory, isn't it? He's saying election fraud. He's just repeating Trump's big lie that voting machines and voter fraud, blah, blah. It's a tired old line.
Yeah, and the Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani, they had a lot of opportunity to make their case, and
yeah, they did.
and they didn't. And he's doubling down on the election machines claims. And the thing about the election machine claims, and they're saying that what they want is transparency. Well, they're about to get a tremendous amount of transparency on the election machines because those companies, Dominion and Smartmatic, are suing them.
Suing left, right, and center.
If Sidney Powell and some of these other folks who've been making these claims about the machines are as convinced of their correctness as they claim to be, they would welcome these lawsuits, because then they would, through discovery, they could get what they say is the evidence that Iraq and Iran and China and Venezuela and everybody else was fixing the elections. So
the ghost of Hugo Chavez.
That's right. So I think that there's going to be the legal system. This is going to bring some transparency to the claims about the election machines supposedly stealing the election.
Exactly. You're exactly right. If what they're saying is true, then yes, they should welcome the chance to prove they have their day in court. Literally, okay, let's prove the fraud then. Prove the fact that these machines were hacked into by the ghost of Hugo Chavez, or communist money filtered through Cuba and all the rest of Venezuela. I mean, come on.
It's interesting. Earlier this week, I went back and looked at a couple Flashpoint episodes from the week of the insurrection. They did a Flashpoint Live town hall on the night of the insurrection. And then they had a regular Flashpoint the next day. So they had 2 days in a row in which, so the insurrection was basically had just happened on the night of the 6th.
Hours old.
And they were already immediately claiming they had evidence that it was Antifa. They had evidence that these were not Trump supporters. These were the devil's people. And so, so therefore on the 6th and the 7th, they had already launched that into into their audience. That you shouldn't even believe what the media was telling you about the insurrection because these were leftists. The Flashpoint host, they actually claimed that that the FBI had brought Antifa there, some kind of a setup.
A false flag type operation.
So the false flag, all of that rhetoric right there in the first 2 days. So,
so they were early adopters of that conspiracy theory, which was pushed all over the place, wasn't it? Now here we have
a little less convincing once we started getting arrests and once we started identifying the people in the videos and finding out how these were Trump supporters and these were people who were in Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and these other right-wing militias. So haven't seen a lot of anti-fascist supporters. So,
haven't found any Antifa arrests or Black Lives Matter protest arresters yet. Now, this is an interesting clip. I wanted to play one last thing. Now, this is Jonathan Cahn. What do we know about Jonathan Cahn? Well, for one thing, he's a rabbi, isn't he? But he's like he's not an Orthodox Jew, is it? He's a Jews for Jesus kind of guy, isn't he?
Yeah. He calls himself a Messianic Christian or Messianic Jew.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's an interesting one because they had, what was it? I can't remember what month it was, but it was in the summer of 2020. He had an event in Washington, D.C. I don't know if you went to that. Wasn't it called The Return or
That
something
was
like
the
that?
return. That was in September
September.
on the National Mall, and he launched that back in March, I think.
Right.
Announced that he was going to do this, and that this was a calling of God to do this, and it was a lot of people rallied around, and he got a huge cross section of the religious right to support him on that. And the whole point of that rally was to show God that the nation was repenting for its sins in order that God would grant us the mercy of getting Trump a second term. So it was really meant to turn around Trump's election prospects.
So Christian nationalism again.
Yeah, and Cahn has sold millions and millions of books. He's author of this series of end times books, where he claims to have found this pattern in the Bible that maps on perfectly to current history and current events. And so, how the Bible foretold everything from Clinton and Obama and Trump's elections, and so that's so he's, and those books are all published by Charisma, the Pentecostal multimedia outlet. Stephen Strang. It has that was pretty much a 24/7 pro-Trump PR operation. So
so I found this is a really interesting clip. I mean, you can see the date here. Just yesterday on Flashpoint, again, he's appearing alongside Mario Murrillo and Hank Kunneman. And what's interesting is he's about to share a little story. I didn't know this about Jonathan Cahn, but I've been doing a lot of research on Jerry Falwell Sr. I've got a really long, it's way too long, an episode coming out on my Profiles of the Christian Right series just on Jerry Falwell Sr.
I will look forward to that.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. The more I researched it, the more obviously you get into it, and you think, my God, this thing is getting out of hand. We're approaching Dan Carlin hardcore history levels here. But the interesting thing is, okay, so in 1980, there was a Washington for Jesus rally held in Washington, D.C. And it was something like April of 19. So it was just not even a year after the founding of the moral majority. One of the first, if not the first, actual sort of evangelical rallies in D.C. They say there was somewhere between 200,000 and 400,000 attendees, which was a record at the time. Now it turns out Jonathan Cahn was at that rally in 1980, and this is really interesting how he ties the whole thing into this Christian nationalism piece as well. So let's listen to this clip from Jonathan Cahn.
So, and I'll just share one thing, a quick thing. When I was a new believer, it was the last days of Jimmy Carter, and America was in gigantic trouble. Everything was, the Iranian hostages, the economy, everything was crazy. Number of believers were called to gather to Washington, and with the promise, 2 Chronicles, if my people, it's all about us repenting first, if my people. So we prayed and we came before the Lord. I was a new believer. But then I saw God work, and we prayed, we lifted our hands to the Capitol building and said, Lord, put in whom you want. And Lord, also release those hostages in Iran, which the Pentagon just tried and they failed. And so a few months later came the election. And it was a revolution, and people who were supporting biblical values were swept into power, including Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan was standing, they switched the election to where the inauguration where it is now. He's standing on the same place where we prayed to, and we put our hands to, say, Lord, put who you want. And at the same moment, the hostages were released, and there was a gigantic turning of history, even led to the fall of the Soviet Union. But it began with the prayers of God's people. And he had his hand on the Bible. And the scripture that his hand was on was, if my people who are called by my name. God.
All right. So there's Jonathan Cahn. What an interesting connection. I didn't know he was at that rally in 1980.
It's interesting because I have heard him talk about that in the context of what they were doing to try to get Trump reelected. And he was sort of, claiming that as precedent for the prophecies and for their belief that the return and the repentance that they were going to offer. So he was basically saying that was an analogy, and that we could count on God to do this because he already did it for us once. So I am not sure how he will explain that it didn't work the second time, or that God said no. I think what Jonathan Cahn would say is, it's up to God to decide that we're too wicked to deserve that much mercy. He gave us 4 years of Trump, and so now we're going to get the judgment. That's kind of how they get around this. I'm guessing if you had a microphone and could ask him, so what about, why didn't it work this time?
Why didn't it work? Yeah, there's always some reason, isn't there? Well, one of the sidelines that's going on, I've heard Murrillo talk about this, as well as Sid Roth, which is interesting. He hosts the It's Supernatural show, and he has all these same people on all the time.
Yeah.
And he did a video just maybe it was yesterday as well, about another 20 or 30-minute video talking about the failed Trump prophecies and, should we lose heart as Christians and all that. And he says, no, we don't know the end yet. It's a classic goalpost moving thing. But then he says, and Murrillo says this too, that next year, or actually this year, there's going to be a massive revival. God is testing the church. You see, that's what it's all about. He says billions and billions of people are going to get saved in 2021. So look for that. It's something like God's golden global something revival. So that's going to happen.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too. Yeah, I know that's a lot of them have been predicting that too. There's been a lot of talk about the billion soul harvest, which is the harvest before the end times. I mean, most of these guys are pretty clear that we are in the final generation before the return of Christ, and so they.
Someone's on the phone back there.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Maybe that phone call might be more interesting than what we're talking about.
Yeah, hold on. I'm just going to close the door. Excuse me.
Hang on, go ahead. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But it's always some new line, isn't it? If it's not one thing, it's 6 others.
But part of the interesting thing was, so pretty much any religious right event I've been to for the last, I don't know how many years, some speaker has claimed that this is the event that people look back on that has sparked the Great Awakening. And, and so they really do believe that, this great spiritual revival is coming. Now, it's interesting because they also thought that Trump had a role in that, in bringing back America back to God, bringing God back into the White House, bringing prayer back into the Oval Office. And that, one of the guys who spoke at the return, said specifically, as they were promoting the return, that revival is not going to come through the prayer closet. It's going to come from the ballot box. So they saw the reelection of Trump as kind of a step toward that revival. So now that's gone, but they're still hoping for the end times revival. And Sean Foyt, who we've talked about before, has really just turned his attention to that. He's going around the country holding these, super spreader events, maskless worship services, events, defying the public health restrictions, because he now believes that he is bringing that biggest revival in the history of the world is coming. So
I think you mentioned that last time. He sort of like wants to replace the lost generation, the new Jesus generation, or something that, so many people have left the church, like me. They've walked away from it all, and so Sean Foyt needs to get those numbers back in there before this whole thing ends pretty soon, apparently.
Well, and I'm really curious because, the numbers of young people leaving evangelical churches, leaving fundamentalist churches, the Southern Baptist denomination is losing people. It's also, I've just thought just recently, since the insurrection, there've been thousands and thousands of people leaving the Republican Party. Tens of thousands of people changing their voter registrations. And I don't know if there's a good analogy there, but it's something about, I think that, what there was just a level of egregious behavior and unprincipled behavior that was so bad that it's forcing people to say, I've had enough, I can't stand it anymore. And I think that's what has happened in a lot of evangelical churches to a lot of young people. And I think it's interesting to see that now happening in the Republican Party, which is, virtually indistinguishable from the white evangelical movement these days.
It is true. I was doing a lot of research. There's a good website called theocracywatch.org. I don't know if you've come across that, but I mean, a lot of the articles are from, well, they're a bit dated now. I don't know if they're updating it still, but they talk about basically the Christian right takeover of the Republican Party back in the 1990s. So off the back of guys like Jerry Falwell, he shuts the moral majority down in 1989, but then there was this far right takeover. And like you say, what's interesting is that the two that I know of, Chris Philotson and Jeremiah Johnson, the two prophets who did publicly apologize, have undergone just a tremendous amount of backlash
Yes.
from the evangelical and charismatic world, death threats, and Chris Philotson took his post down. And I guess I think he did finally repost it, but he's taken a lot of heat. Jeremiah Johnson's taken a lot of heat. So it's really interesting.
I think, you know, a lot of that has yet to play out. I think the splits within the evangelical movement, within the prophetic movement, I don't think that has all settled yet. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But I think you mentioned the sort of takeover of the Republican Party in the 90s. You know, after when Pat Robertson ran for president in '88 and lost, he took the big mailing list that he had put together and hired Ralph Reed. And Ralph Reed is on film, you know, saying that their explicit goal was to take over the Republican Party in 10 years, starting at the ground up. And in the wake of the election loss, I've heard a lot of these religious right folks, the March for Trump folks, and some of the religious right folks saying the exact same thing. You know, one of the prophets, I follow one of the preachers, I'm blanking on which one right now, said, you know, the reason that the election was able to be stolen was that we did not have godly people in local office, in state and local offices. And so because we didn't have godly people there, the bad guys could steal the election. That was actually Rob McCoy, who is a pastor to, and, you know, close ally of Charlie Kirk and David Lane and some of these other Christian nationalist folks. And so they're making that connection. Okay, we lost. We're going to go back. We're going to take over the Republican Party. We're going to kick out the rhinos. So they at least are talking the same way the religious right talked in the 90s about you know, organizing people at the ground level and taking over the party from the ground up. Now, they've already done that to some extent. You know, as these state parties
take it over again.
These state parties
make it more hardcore.
You know, the state parties that are censuring people who voted against Trump.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. You know, we certainly have not seen the end of Trumpism just because Trump lost.
No, absolutely not. So from his fortress at Magistan, who knows what Trump will get up to. Well, listen, this has been really good. Another good chat, Peter. Thanks so much for sharing your insights about all the nuttiness going on in the charismatic Christian world, Christian right.
Can I throw out one teaser for us to look at in the future?
Yeah.
You know, a lot of religious right leaders and ministries are based in Texas.
Yes.
And they all pretty much for the most part promote the sort of biblical economics, you know, this theory that God wants unregulated capitalism and this laissez-faire thing. And so, you know, I mean, it's really a desperate situation in Texas right now. And, you know, we have family and friends there that we're very worried about. And I find myself wondering, what are these guys going to say? You know, I haven't really seen anything out of them, you know, Robert Jefferson, David Barton, and there's a whole lot of guys in Texas. So let's look for that.
Look at the Texas connection. Well, I know one thing. I read an article today on The Intercept that was quite interesting. Just on the right-hand side of things, they're quickly blaming the renewable green energy. Yes. They're saying it was the windmills that froze. That was the whole problem. No, it was the gas turbines. It was the fossil fuel dependent energy that Texas is. Obviously, it's a big part of their state economy. So they're already pushing a fraud lie narrative that, no, it was the green. That's why it's so dangerous, Peter. We shouldn't have windmills. Well, of course, we already knew Trump said that windmills cause cancer and they kill birds. And, oh, man. So that's been a long-standing thing. The other thing I wanted to look at, maybe we could take a look at this too. I don't know if you have any resources, maybe next time when we meet, but I read an article today that said that of all the churches Trump visited while he was president, the vast majority of them were like New Apostolic Reformation type of churches. Now, I don't know any statistics on that, but I think that would be another really interesting thing. So who was he aligned with in terms of Christianity? It's such a diverse spectrum. He was certainly more aligned with the Paula White Cahn types, wasn't he? Which is in that NAR camp rather than your sort of mainstream, just a Baptist or Presbyterian church that supported him.
Yeah, that would be an interesting study. I'd be very curious to that. I think your your gut is right. Anecdotally, I think most of the churches that I can think of off the top of my head that he went to or that hosted rallies for him were kind of this prophetic Pentecostal type. And he had his Jeffersons, who's Southern Baptist. But yeah, there's no question that the Pentecostal New Apostolic folks had a much bigger role in his administration and in Republican politics in his administration than ever before.
Yeah, that's true. So things to look for next time. So I'll let you know when this episode comes out. We'll chat about it. I'm interested to hear what people's comments and questions are. We'll meet up again, hopefully in about a month, and I'm sure we'll have much more to talk about. You've given us some food for thought.
All righty. Thanks for having me on.
Okay. Thanks, Peter. I'll see you in a month. Take care.
You too.